Assalamu alaikum wa نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين يا خاتم النبيين يا شفيع المذنبين يا أنيس الغريبين يا رحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. I think we'll get started, inshallah, and continuing kind of where we sort of left off last week. And of course, to begin with, we spoke about the prophets in general, because of some questions that had come up, and we dealt with that. And then we kind of got back on track with Ahlul Bayt, or the household of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as we were talking, you know, we're into that era of the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu. So I mentioned one thing, and then I'm going to kind of go forward with that. When Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu became the Khalifa, and of course for the first 6 months you had the Ridda Wars, which are where people apostated and were opposing Islam and basically getting ready to fight against the Muslims, claiming to be Muslims themselves. And so we dealt with somewhat of that aspect, and how Ali radiallahu anhu came to the aid in the time of difficulty of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And so after this, after the Ridda Wars, and you have other things that are going on. And one of the other things, of course, is, you know, when the Muslims, with Abu Bakr as their leader, have basically secured Arabia. So, you know, this now is seen as a threat by the Persians as well as the Romans. And the Romans here, we're talking about the Byzantine Empire. And so now you have issues, you know, where they're kind of creating issues. And these issues weren't new. You know, some of them were from the time of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and especially dealing with Rome. But you know, if you remember, after Sulh Hudaybiyah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent letters to various leaders, including Heraclius, who is the emperor of the Roman Empire, and Qisra, or Hormuz Qisra, who was the emperor of the Persian Empire. Heraclius, even though he did not accept the message, he treated the letter with respect. Whereas Qisra, because whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would send a letter to anyone, you know, if he sent it to a believer, it would start off with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And then he would say that this is a letter from Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to whoever. If he was writing it to a non-Muslim, or if it was being written to a non-Muslim, it would start off with, you know, Assalamu alaikum wa ala peace be upon those who accept right guidance. Man ittaba al-huda, those who accept right guidance. Meaning, if you accept this letter and you follow it, then peace be upon you. If you're not, then peace is for those who believe. And again, the same thing, it would be, this is from Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to whoever. So when the letter arrived, you know, in Persia, Qisra, the emperor, when he looks at the letter, he immediately tears the letter up. He tears the letter in two. And then, you know, and he was upset that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam placed his name before, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam placed his own name before the name of Qisra. So this upset him, so he tore the letter up. And he did not kill, but he abused the ambassador that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had sent. And so when the ambassador came back, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to him that Allah will rip his kingdom as he has ripped my letter. But Qisra didn't stop here. If you remember, this time no one cared about the Arabs. No one cared about what was going on in Arabia because these were a bunch of nomads and nobodies. The Romans were fighting the Persians were fighting the Romans, and they were always worried about some other threats and things. No one looked at the Arabs as any threat or as anything really. But now this is starting to change. So, and especially when this letter arrives, so now Qisra, he sends 2 of his men to go and arrest Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these 2 men come, and when they came, one thing was that they had long mustaches and their beards were shaven. And so, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked them when they arrived, and of course, the thing we have to remember here is, all of the companions were defensive about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he didn't walk around with bodyguards and an entourage. So if somebody came to meet him, they could meet him. And so when these guys arrived, of course, they're expecting all this entourage and stuff. They don't see any of that. And then they come to the messenger. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knows who they are. And of course, he's not threatened by them. He doesn't fear anyone except his Lord. And so when he asked them, he said, why do you, have these long mustaches and shave your beard? And they said that our Lord commands us this. Their Lord meaning their king, Qisra. And so this is when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says to them, he says that my Lord has commanded me to grow my beard and to trim my mustaches. And of course, they tell him that we've come here to take you to Qisra and all of this. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells them, he tells them Qisra is dead. And they ask him, do you know what you're saying? He says, the king of the world. What do you know who you're talking against? He says, yeah, go. When they come back, they find out that the son of Qisra had killed him and taken the throne. Yes. So Qisra's son killed his father and became the king. And now, he doesn't want anything to do with dealing with the Arabs, and he tells his men to leave, all the orders that his father had given against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those are null and void now. One of those ambassadors, or basically not people that Qisra had sent, became Muslim when he finds out, because he says there's no way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could have known this except that he is the messenger of Allah. But of course, kings are kings, and kings are always, it's one thing to acquire power, but then it's something totally different to try to maintain that power. And they're willing to do anything to maintain that power. And so now, during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, now the Arabs again, and the Muslims, rather, not just the Arabs, but the Muslims specifically, are seen as a threat. So Abu Bakr radiallahu now starts sending armies in that direction. He already sent the army that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had already prepared to go and deal with the Romans, and then there are further armies that are being sent after that. So after the Ridda Wars, now you have more armies being sent in towards Rome, as well as armies being sent towards Persia. And so people would come to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu asking him to be allowed to enter certain armies. And the reason I've mentioned all of this is to get to this point that I'm coming to now. So one of the people that came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu. And if you remember, Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu became Muslim after Fatih Makkah. His sons became Muslim after Fatih Makkah. He had two main sons, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and Yazid. This Yazid is not the same Yazid. This is that Yazid's uncle. Okay. This Yazid will pass in a plague that will take place during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu. Okay. So this is not that Yazid. You know, people see the name Yazid, then they automatically think, yeah, this is a different person. Okay. So he comes to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, asking him to allow his sons to join the expeditions towards Sham. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu unequivocally says no. Absolutely not. And there's a reason for that. So Abu Sufyan, now he goes to, he wants, his sons to be allowed to go in these expeditions towards Sham. And I'm not going to get into the reasons here. So, and Abu Bakr says, absolutely not. So now he needs someone to intercede on his behalf. If he's going to get his sons to go, he's got to have somebody that Abu Bakr respects and loves and honors to go and ask him, please do this, and allow them to go. So who does he go to? He goes to Ali radiallahu anhu. And we've talked about this before, about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's attitude toward Ahlul Bayt. And even his statements and his actions. Of course, people would argue with me about the actions when they talk about fidq, but we've talked about that already, so I'm not going to go over that again. And he said, I love to do good to the household of Rasulullah, so some more than I love to do good to my own household. So Ali radiallahu anhu comes to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and says, let them go. And now Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says, okay, fine, you can go. Why did Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu say no to begin with? Why did Ali radiallahu anhu intercede on the behalf of Abu Sufyan and have Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu change his position? The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu that no secret came into my heart that I did not pass on to the heart of Abu Bakr. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is given, a taste of the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he knows what is going to happen later on, and especially what is going to happen with Ahlul Bayt because of these people going towards Sham. Because what's going to happen, of course, is, Muawiyah will become the governor of Sham, and then other things will happen. We're going to cover those later on. And then eventually, the son of Muawiyah, Yazid, will become the king, and we know what he did with the household of Rasulullah. Abu Bakr knows this. But he says, no, absolutely not. Ali radiallahu also knows this. Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha. Where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its door. So Ali knows as well. Ali knows exactly what's going to happen in Karbala. And this is, not from the books of history, this is from the books of hadith. Imam Hussein al-Islam knew what was going to happen in Karbala. So why does Ali intercede on his behalf? And says, let them go. Because Ali radiallahu, he knows the will of Allah. As Abu Bakr radiallahu does himself. But Abu Bakr radiallahu, he doesn't want anything to happen to the household of Rasulullah. Ali radiallahu, this is his household. He knows what's going to happen. But he knows that this has to happen in order to safeguard Islam. In order to give the Muslims an example of true patience and reliance on Allah. And so it's going to happen to his household, so he says, yeah, let them go. So they go. And we'll get into this later on as to what happens once they go. The other thing that I'd mentioned last week was, before this, Abu Sufyan himself had come and said to Ali radiallahu anhu, that they've chosen this old man as the leader, so when you should be the leader, and if you want, I'll bring a whole army, and you can capture the Khilafah or the king. For them, there were the Khilafah was not the same as what it was for those who were Muslims early on, as far as their understanding. I'll get into that in a second. And here, people could make a clip out of what I'm saying right now, say, oh, see, he's talking against the companions, because they don't want to listen to the rest of what I want to say. But, so, because these certain feelings still existed within them. And so Ali radiallahu is the one who says, no, Abu Bakr radiallahu is the one who united us. And I mentioned this last time. So here, when we talk about the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, first off, we have to go into the definition itself. Because a lot of people, they use a definition that's incomplete. The definition that they use is that anyone who saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with iman, which is true, but it's incomplete, because that person not only had to see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with iman, he had to die on that iman. So because there were people who fell into this state of apostasy and then became Muslims again later on, they don't classify as Sahabi anymore. They lost that category. Because I've seen other people who even say, oh, anyone who saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, well, and then they want to try to make Abu Jahl a Sahabi and stuff. And just, stupid stuff like this. So someone who saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with iman and died on that iman. But he also, that iman had to be accepted by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like Wahshi, we spoke about him last week. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that your iman is accepted, right? But just don't come in front of me because it reminds me of my uncle. And this is the one who is bil mu'minina ra'uf rahim. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to the believers ra'uf. He is forgiving and merciful. All right. Wahshi is a believer. But this was, this is Rahmatul Alameen saying this, the mercy to all of creation, telling Wahshi, just don't come in front of me. So that's one aspect. There are those, Abu Sufyan is Sahabi. His sons are Sahabi. And all of those who are Sahabi will enter Jannah, and they will not be touched by the fire. But this does not mean that they are innocent. This is the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make this statement that all of my companions will go to Jannah. Even with all of their shortcomings, they will go to Jannah. And you can't categorize all of the companions the same. Just like when we spoke about the prophets, their levels and statuses among them. Again, the companions also. You cannot equate those who became Muslim later to those who accepted Islam early on. And the Quran mentions this when it talks about about those who the awwalun, those who entered Islam first. They're not the same as those who came later. Their status is far above that. And so people, they'll mention this hadith, but again, they mention half the hadith, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Don't say anything bad about my companions." Who did he say that to? What were the conditions of him saying that? If you look at the whole hadith, what happened was that Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu anhu, who became Muslim a year before Fatih Makkah, he had a dispute with Abdul Rahman bin Auf, radiallahu anhu, who is one of the early Muslims. And he said some words to him. And so Abdul Rahman bin Auf came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam rebuked Khalid. And he says to him, "Do not curse my companions. Because even if you," Khalid is also a companion, he says, "even if you spend the mountain of Uhud in the way of Allah, it's not even equal to one mud, which is equal to like 600 grams, which is a little more than a little more than a pound. So they spend a little bit more than a pound of grain, and you spend a mountain of gold of Uhud, and you still can't equate to them." But he's saying this to another companion, to Khalid, saying that you are not equal to these people who came before. We, comparatively wise, we are nothing. All right? So we don't even come close to even, the minutest of companions. But again, even the companions have their levels. So when there's a dispute between the companions, you can't simply say, they're all companions, so I can't, I can't side with either one, which is totally wrong. That goes against the Quran and against, the Sunnah of Rasulullah, against the Sunnah of the companions themselves. And these are things that we're going to really discuss, when we start talking about the Khilafah of Ali, right? Because this is where a lot of that detail, we'll go into a lot more detail. But these are certain points that you should remember, so that when we talk about the details, it's going to be much easier to understand. Okay? But coming back to where Rasulullah said, "None of my companions will be touched by the fire; all of them will go to to Jannah." So this again is those who are the companions, those who saw him with Iman, who died on that Iman, who he accepted. There was a list that he gave to Hudhayfa bin Yaman, radiallahu anhu, a list of hypocrites. And if you read those hadiths, part of this started when Rasulullah was returning from Tabuk, and you have 12 people who are amongst the companions, who tried to push him off a ledge. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew who they were. Hudhayfa radhiyallahu also saw them. But he told Hudhayfa not to tell anybody. This is your secret. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not worried about being assassinated. You know, nothing was going to happen to him until his mission was complete. And whatever happens is the will of Allah, and he was satisfied with whatever the will of Allah is. So this is why during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu, which we're going to get into in a minute, he wouldn't go to anyone's janazah unless he knew Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu was going. You know, when he found out that Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu knew the names of the hypocrites, not just those 12, but others, he came to Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu and says, "Give me their names." He says, "I will not," you know, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam maybe promised not to tell anyone. So after he kind of insisted and he saw he wasn't getting anywhere, he says, "Then at least tell me, is my name in that list?" This is his honesty. He says, "Is my name in that list?" And Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu says, "No, your name's not in the list." But even with all of their shortcomings, those who truly were companions, which includes Abu Sufyan, and Muawiyah, and others who people have issues with. Yeah, you know, they're companions, but they're not the same as these other companions. And yeah, they're going to Jannah, but they're going to go to Jannah because of the authority of Rasulullah with all of their shortcomings. If all of them had never committed any mistakes, then, you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam making the statement wouldn't be such a big deal. You know, you're so pious and righteous, and so because of your deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is entering you into Jannah, right? But here, no. This is the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said they will all go to Jannah, and because of his statement, Allah will honor and fulfill his statement. You know, this is the price of seeing the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or this is the reward of simply seeing the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with iman and being steadfast on that iman. That even with all the other shortcomings that you have, you know, those who qualify under this category, even with all the other shortcomings that they have, they will go to Jannah without being touched by the fire. But it doesn't mean that they didn't have shortcomings. And so this is important to understand. And we don't criticize them, but we mention what happened so that we can learn from it. And you know, and I've talked about this before. The simplest example of this is the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she, the female companion who committed zina. And then when she made tawbah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that her tawbah, you know, if it was distributed, and you know, long story short, you know, if it was distributed over all of the people of Medina, they would all be forgiven. So this is the status of the companion. Yeah, they had their shortcomings, but they always enter that door of tawbah. Whether we know it or not, that's a different issue. Okay? So I'm hoping I'm making this clear as I go, because again, this is where people start really kind of deviating, and you have some people who start cursing the companions, and then you have other people who try to defend the actions of these companions that you can't defend. You know, so we don't criticize them. We mention things, and we take lessons from it and move on. And that should be our attitude. And we love them all. Doesn't mean that we love them all equally. Now, you can't love them all equally because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't love them all equally. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that there are various stages and statuses among them. And again, these are things that are mentioned in the Quran. So these are things that, if we deny them, then we're denying the Quran. So, yeah, if any questions come up on this later, we'll deal with that, inshallah. But I think I'm going to move on. So this is how, Muawiyah radhiyallahu will end up in Sham. So Ali radhiyallahu is the one who interceded on their behalf to get to make it possible for them to go. During the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anh, there was no official position of Chief Justice. And you'll see this, when you look at the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anh, he was surrounded by companions who were what you would call the older, more experienced, more senior companions. So he didn't have to kind of, create official positions for him. They were there. He could rely on them for whatever he needed and whatever the Muslims needed. But even if you look at this, if you look at the position of Ali within the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, even though there is no position of Chief Justice, Ali acts as the Chief Justice, without the title. Any questions come up, you have to have a final decision on something, all of these things are always directed toward Ali for his opinion and for his knowledge. And as I mentioned before, Abu Bakr continues to distribute the proceeds from Fidaq to take care of the household of Rasulullah as it was distributed during the time of Rasulullah. So he didn't change how it was distributed. When he's about to pass, so Abu Bakr, when he's about to pass, so he was Khalifa for about 2.25 years. So at this point, when he's about to pass, of course, he himself says that, choose Omar as your leader. He did not appoint Omar, because some people make it sound like he appointed Omar as the leader. The Khalifa doesn't have the authority to appoint someone as the leader after him. Because that always comes back to the Shura. He can suggest, and he can recommend somebody, and if the Shura decides to accept that person, then, that's fine. If the Shura decides not to accept that person, they can go with somebody else. But the Shura accepted. No one had any issues with Umar at this point. If you remember, we mentioned that the Ansar had some issues with Umar earlier on as being the first Khalifa. But by this time things have settled down. Situations have changed, and now no one has any issues. And most of all, Ali had no issues with Umar becoming the Khalifa. Otherwise he would have objected, which he did not. But as he's about to pass, they asked Abu Bakr, he says, look, when you pass, where do we bury you? So, because the normal thing would be to bury him in Jannat al-Baqi, which is the graveyard next to or close to the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, look, he tells him, he said, look, I've never made a decision in my life on my own. And I'm not going to start now. He says, take me, you know, after you bathed me and shrouded me, then take me to the Rawda of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and say to him that this is your friend, Abu Bakr. And whatever answer you get from there is what you will do. You know, because if you look at Abu Bakr, even before his Islam, even before Islam came, of course, you know, he's one of those who were right there when Islam came. So even before Islam, he never did anything without consulting with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam first, because they were very close friends. You know, from childhood, they were very close friends. To the extent, you know, if he needed to go on a business trip, he would always consult Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, the first person he would see when he returned from any trip would be Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The last person he would see when he would leave for any trip was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why he says, I'm not starting any decisions now. You know, I didn't do it all my life. You know, I always relied on him. I'm not starting to make, you know, I'm not starting a new trend at this point, at the end. So he was the same person at the end as he was at the beginning. There are people who said, oh, he changed after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which he did not. So he says this, he says, you know, but he also, he says to Ali, he says to bathe me, you will bathe me with the same hands that you bathe the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because Ali is the one who bathed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam before he was enshrouded him. And so here also, Ali is the one who bathes Abu Bakr and shrouds him. And before they bury him, you know, Ali places his, as they're taking him, Ali places his hand on, you know, the, you know, when you're being carried on the, I don't even know what you call it. Tabut, yes. So when you're carried on the I guess the stretcher or whatever, or the cot that your body's being carried on to the grave, Ali places his hand on that, and you know, of course, there's no one more eloquent than Ali other than Rasulullah. So after, you know, in eloquence, no one could match Ali. And he you know, just kind of, which I don't remember what the words are, but he says this long eulogy praising Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And when he's taken before the Rawda of Rasulullah, the tomb or the grave of Rasulullah, they set him there and they address Rasulullah saying, Ya Rasulullah, this is your friend Abu Bakr. And of course, some people dispute this, but some people dispute everything. You know, this is mentioned in various narrations, which some scholars say are sahih, where the doors of the Rawda opened and said, bring the friend to his friend. And this is why he's buried there next to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the voice of Rasulullah instructs them to bring his friend to his friend. So he's buried there alongside with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is what he desired. So now Umar becomes the Khalifa. And of course, during the Khilafah of Umar, you have a lot of official declarations and official laws that are set, you know, as far as, you know, state, how the state and the government is run. And so during the Khilafah of Umar, you have that official position being created of Chief Justice. And so Ali, for the 10 years that Umar is Khalifa, Ali holds that position.
So he was Khalifa for 10 years?
Yeah, about 10 years. A little bit over 10 years. So yeah, he was Khalifa for a little bit over 10 years. And so So basically, for the 2.25 years of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he's the untitled Chief Justice, and now for the whole Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu, he is Chief Justice with the title as well. Umar radiallahu anhu wants, because all of these battles are taking place, and Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to go and join the battles that were being taken place toward Persia. And Ali radiallahu anhu is the one who says, no, you can't go. People don't understand this, but in Islam, because we've been so brainwashed into thinking, the Amir, which they mean the king, has absolute authority. Or so any Muslim leader has absolute authority, which is not the way it works. The Khalifa is not a king, nor is he a president or a dictator. The Khalifa is in the service of the people. He serves Allah by serving the people, and making sure that everybody is given their rights, and that everybody obeys the rights of Allah and His Messenger. This is the duty of the Khalifa. He is literally a servant to the people. But also, the Chief Justice in reality has more authority than the Khalifa. If you think about this, the Khalifa can't, he can ask the Chief Justice, to come in and do something, or ask him, why did you give us such a ruling? But he can't demand anything from the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice can call the Khalifa into his court. So this is another argument against some people who try to, in their claim of love of Ali, they literally are trying to diminish his position. So Ali radiallahu anhu is Chief Justice. And, all of these things are going on. When we look at the attitude of Umar radiallahu anhu toward Ahlul Bayt, one of the other things that Umar radiallahu anhu does, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was, of course, distributing the proceeds from Fidaq as they were during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but there wasn't like an official position to do that. So now Umar creates an official position, and he assigns, Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah, and Ali to be in charge of this, to make sure that is distributed as Rasulullah distributed it. So that's an important point to understand and note. Of course, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein al-Islam, of course, they're getting older. They were, they at the beginning of the Khilafah of Umar, they are roughly 9 and 10. So by the end of the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu, they will be roughly 19 and 20. Of course, you have, and when Ali radiallahu tells Umar radiallahu, you can't go to these battles, because he says to him, because if something happens to you, then who will take care of Islam? Who will keep all of these fitnas out of Islam? So you can't go like this. So Umar radiallahu used to make the dua that, oh Allah, give me shahada, and give me shahada in Medina Munawwar. So first, if you look at all of these expeditions, because before you have companions that were martyred in Medina. You look at Khandaq, you know, Uhud, of course Badr is a ways away. But you had companions that were martyred in Medina, such as Sa'd bin Mu'adh. But now all of the battles are far away, right? So how are you going to become a martyr? And he doesn't specify and when you aren't going into those battles. And then on top of that, how are you going to become a martyr in Medina? Yeah. But of course, this is the dua of Umar. So we'll see that, you know, at the end. So Umar radiallahu makes this dua regularly. That, oh Allah, give me shahada and give me shahada in Medina Munawwara. As you know, these spoils are coming in. So again, you know, we're focusing on Ahlul Bayt. So I want to focus on the attitude of Umar toward Ahlul Bayt. So, you know, as the spoils of war come in, Umar radiallahu, another thing that he did was he specified, you know, for those who, you know, took part in Badr, they were given a certain stipend. Those who took part in Uhud were given a different stipend. You had various levels of people given, you know, so-and-so received this much, so-and-so received more, you know, because he's also a Badri, you know, in addition to being, you know, other statuses among the companions. And so you had different levels. The highest that he distributes to is, you know, Ahlul Bayt. But the other thing is that he also, when he distributes the spoils of war that come in from all of these battles, the first people that he gives it to is Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You know, before distributing to anybody else, he distributes them to them first. And so, you know, some of his sons asked him, they said, you know, why do you do this, you know, for Hassan and Hussein when we are your sons? You know, you are the Khalifa, you're the leader, right? And we're your sons, so we should be getting things first. So there's a response to them, and a lot of people talk about the response, but they only talk about half the response. The first part of the response, he says that you bring a grandfather and a grandmother like the grandfather and the grandfather of Hassan and Hussein. But he didn't stop there. He says, and you bring a father and a mother like the father and the mother of Hassan and Hussein. And I will distribute to you first. So this also shows you, you know, of course, you know, his attitude toward Rasulullah, no one questions. Of course, the wife of Rasulullah, Khadija, who is the grandmother of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. But it also shows you his attitude toward Ali, and towards the wife of Ali, the daughter of Rasulullah, Fatima, who is already passed. So, I don't know. People are constantly trying to belittle the statuses of various people. You know, I don't need to belittle anyone's status for people to understand the maqam or to get a glimpse of the maqam of Ahlul Bayt. So that's one point here. So whenever he would distribute the spoils that came in, always Hassan and Hussein were first. Even before his own sons or before anybody else. The other important point to note here is, you know, when Jerusalem is conquered, the people of Jerusalem say that we will only give the key to the city to the leader of the Muslims. So the army there that was there, you know, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu and Khalid bin Walid radiallahu, these two were there. So initially, you know, Abu Ubaidah went and said, no, this is not the person that's described in our books. So he leaves. So then they send Khalid, and they said, no, this isn't him either. So Khalid, you know, the thing is, Khalid is Umar radiallahu cousin. Physically, he is similar to Umar. Abu Ubaidah radiallahu was he's one of the early companions. He is Ashara Mubashara. Very early companion. Very similar in attitude and character, in attitude and various things to Umar. So the way he dressed was very similar to Umar. Very, very simple clothes that usually were torn and were patched up. Khalid used to dress a little more fine. But Khalid was also a very tall man, and again, they're cousins, so some of the features resembled Umar. So they said to them, they said that we want a person, the person we're talking about is someone who dresses like the first man and looks like the second man. So they understood, okay, this is Umar. So they send a messenger to Umar saying, this is the situation, this is what we got. And they're, they're besieged, the city is besieged, and they're willing to give up, but they will only give up, to the leader of the Muslims personally. And we tried this and it didn't work, and they said, you're the person. So Umar leaves Medina Munawwara with a servant, and that's it, just two men. He travels all the way from Medina Munawwara to Jerusalem, just these two men. No entourage, no bodyguards, no one else. That was it. And eventually he gets there, and most of us have heard the story, but of course when he enters, or when he's arriving there, he's the one who's pulling the camel, and the servant is riding on the back. So but the point I want to make here is that when Umar leaves, he leaves Ali in charge. So Umar is leaving with no bodyguards, with just a servant, and making this whole journey, which is several hundred miles, all the way to Jerusalem.
From Mecca, right?
From Medina. From Medina all the way to Jerusalem. And no one else is with him. That's it, just these two men. And he leaves Ali in charge of not just Medina, but literally of the whole empire. Because Umar, when he's traveling, he's out of the loop. It's not like, he had a cell phone and you could call him and say, okay, what's going on? Or he could Skype or whatever else. And this is one of the issues that we get into, especially these days, is when you're talking about that time, people want to equate, what happens now with what happened then. And I think, well, why didn't he just, talk to him? How is he going to talk to him? Because I remember even, when we moved here, like relatives in Pakistan and relatives in India, you couldn't even call. People didn't have a phone. Until in India, in the village, let's see, 94 when I went, there were like 2 phones in the whole village. If anybody wanted to make a call, you had to go to that person's house, just to be able to call, you know, and then, calling long distance was, everything's charged, but even calling overseas is just, So it literally took a month for a letter to get from here to there. Unless you sent like a telegram. Okay. But even that took time. So this was, we're talking late 1900s. And especially like, 1970s and stuff. It literally, it was going to take you, you writing a letter and getting a response. So you wrote a letter, it took a month for that letter to get there. They responded to your letter, after a few days. So yeah, they get the letter, they read the letter, they think about the letter, and then, 2 weeks later they write you a letter. It's going to take another month for you to get the letter. So 2.5 months had passed. And if you ask something, okay, what do I do about this? There are issues. If you need something quick, it's not going to happen. And then actually, this comes to the point of why the Hijrah system was even formed. Hijri calendar that we have, technically this is bid'ah. Because this didn't exist during the time of Rasulullah. There was no calendar, except for the months. There wasn't year whatever. This started during the Khilafah of Umar, radiallahu, because he would write a letter to one of the governors, and then he would write a letter saying this, and then shortly thereafter they'll get another letter that would say, okay, don't do this, do this. Or he wouldn't specify something else. And there was confusion, okay, which letter was actually sent first? Because sometimes you sent one letter and the second letter got there before the first letter. So which letter came first? So we have to have some system where we know. So this is when the companions during the time of Umar, along with Umar, sat down. And they said, okay, so some of them said, well, let's just use the Christian calendar. And that was immediately taken off the shelf. No, we're not going to do that. So some of them suggested, that we start with the birth of Rasulullah in the year of the elephant, so that will be the calendar. Some said, no, let's start with the passing of Rasulullah. That will become the beginning of our calendar. And so Ali is the one who said, no, we will begin at the Hijrah, and that will be our calendar. So this is how we get the Hijrah calendar. So
that's why you say Hijri.
Hijri, yes, yes. So it's based on when Rasulullah made the Hijrah. And then the question comes up, what will be done the first month? Because you got 12 months, well, what's the first? So this is when, again, Ali says that, because, the Hijrah started in Muharram. Muharram is the first month. Because this is when, if you remember, and we spoke about this Friday, when Rasulullah, when the second oath or allegiance of Aqaba takes place, it takes place in Dhul Hajj. And this is when the people of the Ansar say, we're taking you, right? And so the next month is Muharram. So Muharram is when Rasulullah starts sending people. Even though he himself doesn't leave after pretty much everyone else has left, just like any great captain, he's the last to get off the ship, right? So Rasulullah is the last to make the Hijrah with Abu Bakr, and he starts his journey at the end of the month of Safar, and he enters Quba on Monday the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, and he enters Medina Munawwara on Friday the 12th of Rabiul Awwal. And those things we'll talk about
So the
on
first
Friday.
month, Muharram, if you look at it, 1 month is going to be June, July.
What's that?
Muharram, the first one, right, on the Hijri calendar.
Yeah, but see, the Hijri calendar, the lunar year is 11, 12 days shorter than the solar year. So it shifts every year, right? So in 33 years, you've basically gone, like now, Muharram was whatever, June? Yeah. So next year, Muharram, the beginning of Muharram will be early June, and then after that, it will be late May, and then, so it's gonna keep shifting. It's not one per one.
I thought it was 36 years, but I guess, so you say 33?
33, roughly about 33. Yeah. This is why in Surah Kahf, 300 is also mentioned and 309 is also mentioned. Because one is referring to the solar calendar, solar year, and the other is referring to the lunar year. But getting back to, keep playing with it and keep dropping it. It's the problem when you have hands that keep moving. So here again, Omar radiallahu anhu is literally out of the loop as he's traveling. So it's not like he can even send somebody, a message, because it's just him and his servant. So if he sends, the servant off on an errand to go send a message to somebody, he's just going to be by himself. So it's just the two of them traveling. If he had an entourage, he could tell, okay, I need you to get word back to Medina, or I need you to get word to the army ahead of me. But he doesn't have an entourage. So Ali is literally in charge of the whole Muslim empire. Because this is where any governor has a question, any general has a question, where is it going to come? It's going to come to him. He's going to make the decision. And the reason this is so significant is that those people who claim or try to show that there was an issue between Ali and Umar, this would be prime time to create a coup and take power for yourself. So those who claim that somehow Ali was cheated out of his rights. Ali is Asadullah. He is the lion of Allah. He's not he's not like a fox or some animal that's going to run and hide. If he felt like his rights and the rights of Ahlul Bayt were being violated, he was not going to be one to stand back. And so again, Ali says, is in running everything while Umar is gone. I mean, he could have, there's so many things he could have done, if he had wanted to. If that was his intention, if he felt like his rights were being violated. But he didn't. And so as we mentioned, so when we look at these, we look at the love of Ali towards Umar, and we look at the love of Umar towards Ahlul Bayt, and they're like this. These issues that people create, are basically figments of their imaginations. And there are many issues, and we're going to get to that as we keep going on these topics. The other point that I want to make here, because somebody sent me a clip of this guy talking and basically saying that the decision of Umar is the one that is what led to what happened in Karbala. And that's why I emphasized the thing that I did before, during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr. And I'm going to come back to that point. I'm just going to talk for another few minutes and then we'll end, inshallah. After Umar goes to Jerusalem, he takes the key, people of Jerusalem surrender. He makes sure that everybody in the city is safe and everything is kept, everyone is treated well. He returns to Medina. In the meantime, a plague breaks out there. Actually, while he's he's still there before he starts to leave. You know, a plague starts to break out in the north, and it's starting to make its way down. Omar radiallahu anh leaves, and he leaves Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh in charge. Omar radiallahu anh had removed Khalid radiallahu anh from his position as chief general. And that gets into a whole different category of stuff. But then, you know, so he comes back to Medina Munawwara. You know, the plague takes over this whole area. So what today would be basically Sham or Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon. This whole area is basically, you know, the plague is rampant. People are dying, and so one of the first to pass from the plague is Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh. And when he passes, he leaves Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anh in charge. So Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anh, not long after Abu Ubaidah, along with his whole family, passes in this plague. So then he leaves Yazid bin Abu Sufyan radiallahu anh in charge. Yazid bin Abu Sufyan radiallahu anh also passes from the plague. He leaves his brother Muawiyah radiallahu anh in charge. Eventually the plague ends. Muawiyah radiallahu anh is still in charge. Umar radiallahu anh eventually makes another trip in this direction, but he does not remove Muawiyah radiallahu anh from the position. And so this is what this guy in this clip was saying, that CEO, he should have removed him, even though they had their differences, but he left him in that position, and that is what led to Karbala. So if I try to blame Umar radiallahu anh for this, then I end up having to blame Ali radiallahu anh first, because as I mentioned earlier, when Abu Sufyan came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and asked him to send his sons in these armies towards Sham, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh said absolutely not. So then they asked Ali radiallahu anh to intercede, and Ali radiallahu anh is the one who convinced him to let them go. And we talked about why Abu Bakr radiallahu anh said no, and Ali radiallahu anh said yeah, let them go, because both of them knew what was going to come. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh didn't want this happening, you know, didn't want to be responsible for what would happen with the household of Rasulullah later. And Ali radiallahu anh says, no, this is my household, you know, because I am part of the household of Rasulullah and these are my children, and it will happen with them, and you know, and this is what Allah wills, and we will make sabr over it. It's like, and what people don't understand here, it's like in the Quran. If you read Surah Yusuf, you know, when the sons of Yaqub al-Islam, they come to him and they say, yo, you know, you don't let your Yusuf play with us and all of this stuff. What does Yaqub al-Islam say to them? He says that I am afraid that if I send him with you, you know, that you will become busy in playing and a wolf will come and devour him. Which is interesting because Yaqub al-Islam is a prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it haram on the wolf, that the wolf can eat the prophet. Just like he has made it haram on the earth to devour the bodies of the prophet. You know, which we know through various Sahih hadiths. So why is Yaqub al-Islam saying this to them? And if you look at the excuse that they came with afterwards, the same exact words, that, oh, we were playing and a wolf came and devoured them. And they took the blood of a sheep and they put it on the clothes. And of course, the other interesting thing, which is not mentioned in the Quran, is that when they gave him the shirt wasn't torn. So what kind of wolf is this? Didn't even tear his shirt. He knows.
Like a human wolf.
Well, he knew. Yaqub al-Islam knew what was going to happen. You know. So now the question comes, if he knows what they're going to do, and he's telling them, this is what you're going to say to me, why did he let them go? Why did he let Yusuf al-Islam go? Because he also knows that this is the will of Allah, and he bowed to that will. Let him go. Why did he cry then for so long? this is the love. Even though, when Yusuf al-Islam, when the shirt of Yusuf al-Islam, when Yusuf al-Islam, tells his brothers later on, if you read the surah, he says, take this shirt of mine to my father and he will become seeing again. Yaqub al-Islam at that moment, when that shirt starts to travel, he at that moment in Canaan is saying that I smell the fragrance of Yusuf, but you will call me crazy. He knew.
You say Canaan?
Canaan is, kind of
Yemen?
Philistine area, yes. Because they were there, and Yusuf al-Islam, of course, is in Misr. So he says, I smell the fragrance of Yusuf, but you will call me crazy. Because to them, every one of them thought, oh, he's dead. Yaqub al-Islam knew. Again, they say, well, why was he crying? The separation. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knew Hamza radiallahu anhu is Asadullah and he is in Jannah and he is Sayyid al-Shuhada. He's the one who told everybody this. Why is he crying then? I mean, these are matters of the heart. And our problem is we have no concept of love anymore. So we can't understand that. So we think everybody is like us. So the same thing here. Ali Rada, he knows, but he bows to that will. They send them. So here, like the Shia scholar was blaming Umar Rada. Well, if you blame Umar Rada, you got to blame Ali Rada before that. And we don't blame any of them because none of them were at fault. So anyway, so I'll end here today, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand and to know. Any questions? Yeah, so next time when we have class, because I'm not sure if we'll have class next week or not, we'll see. But next time when we have class, then inshallah we'll start into the Khilafah of Uthman as related to Ahlul Bayt. And there's some other things that I'm going to mention about the Khilafah of Umar because as I mentioned earlier, when the spoils of war start coming in, Umar distributes this to Hassan and Hussein first before he distributes anything to anyone else, including his own family. But there are certain spoils of war that come in that will be significant in that will be significant to know who these spoils of war are because of what will come later on, inshallah. So, no questions?
I got one.
Okay.
I don't know it's a long question, but I was looking at something when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he not passed, but when he passed, and was that when the confusion came, and that's when the
like different breakup, like sex and stuff.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
That's when all that took place.
No. So the question is that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was passing, or when he passed, is this when all of these various ideologies developed? And the answer is, the quick answer to that is no. When he passed, this is when you had a lot of groups that apostated. So they basically, denounced Islam. You had others who claimed that they were still Muslim, but they weren't. They refused some of the what is known as Zuriyat ad-Din, or the essentials of the religion, that you can't be Muslim without believing in these. So they refused some of those, which effectively took them out of Islam. One of which, of course, is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Khatam al-Nabiyyin. He is the seal of the prophets, and there are no prophets after him. So you had various people declaring themselves as prophets and claiming that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sanctioned their prophethood. So you had that. But yeah, so that's going to come a little later. A lot of that will happen during the Khilafah of Ali, radiallahu anhu. And honestly, by the end of the Khilafah of Ali, then we'll go into those matters as well, you basically have the foundations for all of these various ideologies that will have developed, or that will branch off from these groups, and will kind of refine themselves over time. So those are things that we will get into more specifically when we talk specifically about the Khilafah of Ali, which really, inshallah, isn't too far away. So just kind of bear with me for the moment. But as I said, when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed, it became more of an issue of, basically Muslims having to fight against those who claim to have been Muslim before. Basically kind of fighting against what you'd call today like an ex-Muslim. And so that's kind of what happened at that point. During the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar, radiallahu anhuma, you really don't have, well, Abu Bakr in the first 6 months of his Khilafah, but after that, until basically the end of the Khilafah of Umar, you don't have any real deviation. More of the deviations will start toward the end of the Khilafah of Uthman, and then and especially into the Khilafah of Ali, radiallahu anhu. And it's interesting just to point here, a man came and asked Ali radiallahu one time that, how come we have all of these issues during your time and we didn't have these issues during the time of Abu Bakr and Umar? He says, because during the time of Abu Bakr and Umar, he says, people like me were their advisors, and during my time, people like you are my advisors. You kind of you have to answer questions based on who's asking the questions sometimes. And that's what he was doing with that response, but which is true. So I didn't answer your question completely, because like I said, we're going to get into that, especially when we get into the Khilafah of Ali, inshallah.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, so like I said, I answered part of your question, but there's a lot more to it. And you'll start seeing it more clearly as we move forward. There are certain foundations that were laid during the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when you see when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself talked about the Khawarij, when Dhul Khawaisra at-Tamimi al-Najdi came and was disrespectful to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and all of those things. And once I get into the Khilafah of Ali, I will reiterate those points as they connect to what we talk about, as we move on, inshallah. So just right now, just remember the various points that we've talked about, so it'll be easier to understand what we talk about later on. Okay, inshallah. Anything else? I still got 7 minutes. Well, good, inshallah. Maybe I explained things well, or maybe I didn't. Either I confused people completely or I explained things okay. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and guide us and give us His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all of those whom they love, inshallah. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.